It's okay not to be okay, but I promise I'm trying. By rayrae118. Chapter 21. The next week, McGonagall made a rather interesting announcement at the end of class. Part of the tradition of the Triwizard Tournament is to have a Yule Ball on Christmas Day. It is open to all students 4th year and above, though a younger year may attend if he or she is escorted by an older student. Mr. Potter, please stay behind. Harry set his book bag down and waited until the classroom had emptied, before he made his way up to the professor's desk. Minerva looked at him and smiled, her stern teacher facade giving way to the caring guardian he'd gotten to know quite well over the summer. Harry, as champion, you will need to make certain you have a partner, though I don't think that will be an issue, will it? Harry blushed but smiled. Why is it necessary? He asked. It is tradition for the champions to open the ball with the first dance. Minerva replied, observing him carefully, noting the sudden paleness of his face. Harry bit his lip, managing to stab out, Dance? Minerva nodded, then frowned. Harry, do you know how to dance? Harry shook his head, embarrassed. No one ever taught me, he admitted, ashamed. Minerva stepped forward, using one hand to force his chin up so that he was looking at her. We can easily remedy that, she assured him. Come and see me after breakfast on Saturday. Perhaps Miss Weasley would like to attend as well. Harry nodded, feeling better. He muttered out a thank you before he went to catch up with his friends. Minerva watched him leave, the smile still gracing her stern features. When Harry caught up to his friends in the Great Hall, he was somewhat confused to find a number of people watching him, mostly girls. They all seemed to be eyeing him in a way that made him a little uncomfortable. He sat down and Harry explained what McGonagall had told him, including the dancing lessons, which he admitted with a definite blush. Thanks to a well-placed elbow in his side, courtesy of Hermione, Ron didn't say anything around the mouthful of food. Not that he really could have. There was a lot packed in there. Hermione just smiled and commented on how it would be very beneficial. Neville looked nervous as he pushed the food around his plate. Do you think Professor McGonagall will mind if I come along as well? He asked quietly. Harry studied his friend for a moment before smiling. You planning on asking someone specific, Nev? Neville blushed but nodded, glancing over at the Hufflepuff table. Harry's smile widened. I think that'd be fine, he affirmed before tucking into his own lunch as Ginny entered the hall, separated from the rest of the third years, and joined them. She gave Harry a sidelong glance as she spooned potatoes into her plate. Did you guys hear about the ball? They all nodded, looking at Harry as well, but the boy who lived just kept eating, hiding his smile. He knew whom he was going to ask, but he wanted to make it special. He would need to send Hedwig off with a letter as soon as he finished lunch. When Harry didn't speak, everyone returned to their own meals, Ginny with a little less enthusiasm than the others. It wasn't like she thought he would take someone else, but she did think he would at least ask her. Harry excused himself when his plate was empty, and told them he needed to get to History of Magic, giving Ginny a quick kiss before leaving the table. Hermione waited until he was gone before turning back to her younger friend. She saw the disappointment. What's wrong, Ginny? She asked sympathetically. Ginny frowned. I know we're going to go together, but because we're dating doesn't mean I wouldn't like to be asked to the ball. Hermione smiled understandingly, while Neville leaned forward, trying to be careful to avoid spray coming from Ron's ingestion of his meal. I'm sure he's going to, he reassured the younger girl. You know Harry. He probably just wants to make it special. Hermione nodded, though she couldn't say anything else as Ron decided to add his 2 peanuts. Unfortunately, it wasn't exactly audible due to the entire steak he had stuffed in his mouth. Hermione sniffed. Pleasant, she commented, before turning to Ginny. Neville's right, Ginny. She smiled. Harry really cares about you. He'll probably ask you in some elaborate gesture. Too bad some others might not have to take that same initiative. The gaze shifted over to Ron, who didn't seem to be aware of anything that wasn't capable of being speared at the end of his fork. Neville chuckled, nodded in understanding, while Ginny just looked away, faintly sick of her brother's eating habits. Ron looked up, seeing their eyes focused on him. Huh? he asked, a bit of potato dropping back onto his plate. Hermione rolled her eyes, setting her napkin down and picked up her book bag. I'll see you guys in history. Don't worry, Ginny. I'm sure it'll happen. Ginny nodded as Neville stood up. Hold on, Hermione. I'll walk with you. The 2 fourth years left, and Ginny turned back to her brother. Honestly, Ron, why we put up with you is beyond me. Ron looked slightly affronted, but also very confused. What do you mean? Ginny sighed. You could start by learning some table manners, she suggested. Or listening while your friends talk. Ron cocked his head to the side, his expression not clearing at all. Ginny sighed, shaking her head. I can't do your thinking for you, Ronald, but you should consider whom you're going to ask to the ball. You might want to think about it quickly before your chosen date gets asked by somebody else. With that, Ginny left and Ron was alone, even more confused than he had been before. History and Defence Against the Dark Arts both passed too slowly and too quickly for Harry. He and his friends had a free period before dinner, so they all decided to go down to the library. Well, Ron wasn't exactly thrilled, but he tagged along rather than being left alone. They found a secluded table in the back, and Harry decided it would be a good time to talk about their Occlumency training. Everything he had read about the subject just seemed to make it more and more attractive a defence to learn. The idea that someone could just rifle through his private thoughts with him being none the wiser was not a pleasant thought. Hermione had been horrified to learn that people would actually do such a thing, especially after learning that the headmaster had tried it on Harry. It was quite a feat of magic that he had been able to enchant an object to protect him from Occlumency attacks. She had asked about the spell work involved, but Harry just blushed and told her that Sirius had done most of it. But she hadn't seemed to believe him. Harry hadn't told Minerva about his superstitions on Dumbledore using Legilimency yet. He wasn't sure what she could do, and he didn't want to worry her. They tried to keep their voices quiet, as none of them fancied Madame Pince throwing them out, and Harry had asked them about their progress. Ginny, who had joined them as they made their way down, since she had had the same free period, was the first to speak. I think I'm almost there. I've been working on organising my memories like the book said, but I can't really tell if my shield's powerful enough to stand up to an attack. Harry nodded. He'd had the same issue. Until he actually went up against the Legilimens, he wouldn't know if they were any good. I think the only thing we can do right now is to keep working on them. Make the shields as strong as you can. And Aunt Minerva said she'd try to find somebody to test us. But I might have to wait until next summer. He smiled. She told me that she learned Occlumency, but never Legilimency. Otherwise she'd just test us herself. Hermione went next and informed them that her progress was much the same as Ginny's. Not that Harry expected anything less. Ron had made slightly less progress, and Ron didn't feel any significant change. Harry just told them to keep working on it. I think we'd do better if there was someone to test us, so that we could know what an intrusion feels like. But I don't much fancy asking Dumbledore or Snape for help. Not that they would. Aunt Minerva says they're the only ones at Hogwarts with the ability. Makes you wonder, Ron trailed off thinking, before he continued a few moments later. Snape always seems to know what's going on, or what questions to ask. What if he does it to students? Hermione gasped. He wouldn't, would he? Unauthorised use of Legilimency is illegal. I can't believe. I don't think he does. Harry cut in patiently. Or did you forget that Dumbledore tried it with me? If Snape does it to students, chances are Dumbledore knows and approves. It was a crushing blow to all of them. The idea that someone they trusted sanctioning such an invasion of privacy was not pleasant. It definitely made Ron vow to work even harder on his Occlumency. He didn't want that greasy git being able to see into his mind. Susan joined them a few minutes later, as her last day of class of the day ended. She thought her progress was the same as Neville's, but she had a few more insights. I could ask my Aunt Amelia about it, she suggested. She should know if a professor is possibly using Legilimency on students, and she probably knows someone who could help us better. I'm fairly certain she's trained in Occlumency herself. Harry nodded. I don't think you should put it in a letter, though. Maybe she'll be able to come and visit next Hogsmeade weekend. Susan nodded thoughtfully and said she'd ask. The group spent the remainder of time before dinner studying, and Harry seemed to spend just as much time watching Ginny as reading his textbook. Ginny caught his eye a time or two, but he just smiled and turned his head back to his book. Dinner started as normally as it did. However, most of the hall's attention was soon attracted by a lone owl that came in shortly after the desserts appeared. Ginny, her attention drawn as well, noted with surprise that the owl in question was Hedwig. That was more interesting to her was that the snowy white bird was carrying a bouquet of roses. She gasped in pleasure as the owl came to rest in front of her. Hands shaking, she removed the bouquet of red and white roses, her cheeks glowing. Attached to the bouquet was a long velvet box. She looked up at Harry questioningly, but he just shook his head. "Open it," he smiled. Ginny did so, and then gasped at the silver bracelet inside. The band was simple, but the charm took her breath away. It was a doe, so artistically created, you could almost believe that it was alive. For its eyes, it had 2 tiny emeralds embedded into the silver. She looked up, tears in her eyes. "Harry," she whispered. Harry took the bracelet from her trembling hands and gently took her arm to attach the jewellery. "It was my mum's," he explained quietly. "I owled Sirius this afternoon. It was something I saw when I looked at my family's vault this summer, and I asked him to retrieve it for me. According to him, my mum was an animagus as well. Her form was a doll. My dad gave her this bracelet when she completed the transformation, right before her 19th birthday." Ginny admired the bracelet. It was gorgeous, but even more precious because of the history behind it. This had belonged to Harry's mum. Harry wasn't finished. "Ginevra Molly Weasley, would you do me the extraordinary honour of being my date to the Yule Ball?" Ginny grinned and nodded. "I'd love to, Harry," she replied, leaning forward to kiss him happily. Then they both could feel the contentment and ecstasy coming from the other. The two broke apart a moment later, suddenly remembering where they were. Most of the hall had gone back to their own meals, but their friends had still been watching with varying degrees of delight. Well, Ron was the only one who looked less than happy, but Harry thought there might be more of them seeing them kiss in front of everyone than anything else. They accepted congratulations with humility, and Ginny showed Hermione her new bracelet. The rest of the week passed in a flurry of guys trying to ask the girl they wanted to the ball, acceptances and rejections. The most surprising came from Hermione. She had joined Harry and Ginny in the common room one night, as the two were the last of their friends still up. She looked somewhat nervous as she asked Harry for a moment. "What's up, Hermione?" he asked, setting the textbook aside. Hermione bit her lip. "I've just come from the library," she began. I have a date for the ball." Ginny looked up, surprised. "I thought—" Hermione's eyes flashed. "Yes, I had hoped. But until he actually wakes up and realises I'm a girl, there's not much I can do. Someone else already realised that, so I said yes." "Who is it?" Harry asked. Hermione flinched. "Victor Crumb," she admitted quietly. "What? What?" Ginny's voice was much louder than she intended, but fortunately there were very few people left in the common room. Hermione looked up, eyes pleading. "This won't be a problem, will it? I know he's your competition, Harry, but isn't this whole part of the tournament about fostering international relationships?" Harry smiled. "I don't mind," he assured his friend. "Victor's a nice guy. I'll just have to make sure he knows if he hurt you, he's dead." Hermione looked scandalised, but Ginny just laughed. Harry shrugged. "I'm just borrowing the same threat Fred and George used on me." Ginny stopped laughing and looked like she didn't know whether to kiss Harry or go and find her brothers and hex them into oblivion. Harry settled that decision by leaning forward and capturing her lips with his, wrapping one arm around her shoulders. Hermione smiled and left them to it. The next weekend found Harry and Ginny camping out in the library. Only part of their studies was school-related, however. Both students were mostly caught up on their classes, so they dedicated this weekend to two separate but equally important studies. In beginning to prepare for the second task, Harry had discovered that his egg made a rather horrendous screeching sound when opened. He and Ginny had listened and discussed, came to the conclusion it might sound differently under different circumstances, so they were researching possible ideas. It was Ginny who found their first real possibility. "Harry, listen to this," she said, holding up a copy of Unmasking the Wilds, Magical Creatures of Every Habitat, and began reading a specific paragraph. "Some of the most mysterious magical creatures are the merpeople. Colonies exist all over the world, but few have ever really been able to observe them in their natural habitat. They have their own villages and customs and their own language. They can breathe both in water and in air for limited amounts of time. But since their language can only be heard properly in water, on land it mostly sounds like high screeching." She looked up, eyes eager. "What if the screaming from the egg is mermish?" Harry nodded, slowly, leaning forward. "So then it's possible that we have to hold the egg underwater. It would give us the clue," Ginny finished excitedly. Harry smiled. "We'll do that next weekend then," he decided. "Now let's see if we can find anything in these other books." Harry set down his studies for the tournament and started to turn to their second project. Ever since realizing they could feel each other's emotions, they had been meaning to research just why that might be. This was the first opportunity they had to do so without their friends present. Neville had worked up the courage to ask Susan to the ball, finally, and the two were spending the day together. Ron had had a bit of a falling out with Hermione over her refusal to tell him who was taking her to the ball and his refusal to believe she actually had a date. Hermione was furious with Ron and had taken them to the DA study. The last meeting had worked on accuracy of spell work, and McGonagall had done a fine job of animating a few practice dummies, which Hermione was no doubt destroying at this very moment. Ginny picked up a rather worn copy of The Bonds of Time and began reading the section on soul bonds. There wasn't much, and much of what was written was speculated, but she persevered, hoping for some more information. Harry chose a very slim volume simply titled Soul Bonds. There was no more than 50 pages to the length, but it spoke exclusively on the topic they were most interested in. They passed the remaining hours of the day reading and comparing notes before joining their friends for supper. They hadn't learned much, but Harry had found some useful information in his book. There were many different types of soul bonds, and they could be formed for a number of reasons. Those formed due to life debts were very specific, but more common than fated bonds. He wondered if his actions in the Chamber of Secrets had done something to do with this. Apparently, if their soul bond was due to a life debt, then they would become attached to one another. Not necessarily soulmates, but they would always be in each other's lives. They could feel emotions, but not much more. A fated soul bond would have been created the moment Ginny had been born. Such a connection would strengthen over time, but would need some sort of physical or emotional attraction between the two before it would begin to manifest. Simply put, it would mean that they had always been destined for each other, but they needed to realize that before it would happen. From what Harry had read, it would start with the sharing of emotions, then move on to constant awareness of where the other was, what they were doing. Sometimes that included seeing through the other's eyes, depending on the strength of the bond. Some couples had noted they could communicate by thought or share power to create stronger spells. Of course, none of them really told them what was going on with them, so the only thing Harry could come up with was to wait and see if any other skills developed. "I don't think we should tell anyone else for now," he suggested carefully as they packed up the books back to their places on the shelves. "We still don't know what's going on, and until we do, there's not much point in telling anyone, right?" Ginny nodded her agreement. "We'll keep researching. It would be easier if the information was more readily available, but we'll make do. Maybe next summer, if we need to, we can consider telling somebody. But I'm not sure how my mum would react. She'd probably lock me in my room until I graduate." "But how would you graduate if you can't leave your room?" Harry looked at Ginny for a moment before they both burst out laughing, earning them a hard glare from Madame Pince as they left. Both felt they had had a rather productive day, all things considered. End of chapter 21. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed this. Oh, things are starting to heat up. Ron finally realising Hermione is female. Wow, only took you 3 years, buddy. And the ball coming up, and them finding out about the egg and the bonds starting to make a bit more sense. I'm really enjoying this. This is where it starts getting properly fun. I know I've said that a few times, but can you blame me? This is one of my favourite fics. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye, my guys, gals, or non-binary pals. See you in the next chapter. Bye!